Good day to all of you. Today we remember the Holocaust. 87 years ago this September, the German government took the first step in removing German Jews from public life. They stripped them of their protections of German citizenship simply because of the religion their neighbors practiced. Over the next decade, the Nazis took the lives of over 10 million civilians simply because they were different. People who were Jewish or Gypsies, people who had a handicap, people who were Polish or Slavic, gays, lesbians, black, or those that were simply just sick. I've taught Holocaust studies my entire teaching career. I still remember the classes I took in middle and high school. It's personal for me. I have family that were survivors. Many of their immediate family perished, brothers, cousins, sisters, again, simply because they were different. In 1990, my father began dating the woman who would become my stepmother 2 years later. Her parents, Walter and Trudy Marks, treated my sister and I like their grandchildren. The children of a stranger, treated like family from the very start. I never had a relationship with three of my biological grandparents. They stepped in as caring grandparents. Both grew up in Stuttgart, Germany. Walter came to the United States during the early wars and joined the American Army as a member of the Specialized Ritchie Boys unit, working as an interpreter for military leadership, eventually earning recognition from French President Charles de Gaulle. He was able to assist in the liberation of concentration camps and eventually was able to reunite with his parents. My grandmother was also very lucky. She made it to England and hid there for the duration of the war. 6 million people exactly like them, European Jews, did not have the same fortune and perished. I've often wondered how could people who had seen the evils of such a nightmare give love and compassion like they did to us, treating young children who were not of their own blood like family from the very first time meeting. When I decided to become a teacher, I made it a goal to share their stories. I wanted to share their stories of the millions who did not have the same chance to love someone like they did us. Today, which we call Yom HaShoah, we remember the extinguishing of these lives. The purpose of this remembrance is not only to remember people who died at the hands of cowardice and evil. As educators and students, we commemorate this day to ensure we do whatever we can to avoid an event like this from ever happening again.
Never Shall I Forget by Elie Wiesel. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp that turned my life into one long night 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never.
Holocaust by Sudeep Pagadir. Holocaust. How do you explain that term to a 10-year-old boy who one day hears it mentioned by some relatives? And even if you do manage to make him understand what it actually does mean, do you also tell him that because he's a German Jew, perhaps someday he might be included in it? Or should he just not be told, so that he remains calm and doesn't lose sleep over it? But what is sleep in front of death? Perhaps death is greater. Perhaps the two are the same. We do not know yet, but we will know by the end of the day. The chambers are yet some hours away. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. How did Shakespeare realize that? Did he know some Jew who was persecuted too? Perhaps he was wrong. Maybe he was right. Anyway, I suspect we'll find out by tonight.
My name is Menachem Warshawski. I was born in Pabianice, Poland. Just to point out my father's, my paternal and my maternal side of the family, they lived in Poland for hundreds of years. After the war, I couldn't find a single one. When Hitler and his armies crossed the boundaries of Poland, and the first time, but that didn't stop us. I know there were rumors about what Hitler is capable of doing, but somehow, either for a 9-year-old it didn't reach me, or the whole community did not pay much attention to it. And we normally went to synagogue Saturday morning, knowing the road, so I figured I'll meet some kids that I haven't seen for a while. I went ahead of father and grandfather. And on the way, there was a crowd, not a big crowd, maybe 20, 30 people. What it was a Jew that is obviously Orthodox with a beard and payas and what have you, and dressed in his Saturday best, laying on the ground, bleeding from his head, motionless. He was dead. And that's the first time I ever saw a dead person. Black uniforms and boots with SS on the collar. One of them took his head, dipped it in blood, and he wrote on the sidewalk, J-U-D-E. It means Jude, Jew. We were removed from our home, and in the old town, they allowed 2 square blocks to have the ghetto. They shoved in which was primarily Jewish area. They shoved in about 10 or 15,000 more Jews in the same area. There were 9 of us. We were allocated 1 room, and some of us slept on the bed and some of us slept under the bed. And in the same room was a kind of a portable stove that's for cooking, and a table and a couple beds. There was no way you could exist on the rations that they had. And the only thing that was nourishing of a sort was the soup that you got at work, because everybody had to work. If you didn't work, first of all, you didn't have the rations for surviving, and you didn't get that soup. They knocked out a couple windows, and a truck was below, about at least 1 story high, and they picked up the sick people by the arms and the legs, and they just heaved them out through the window into the truck. So Father knew what's happening, and my younger brother was not allowed to come with us. Father, we were separated by that time between male and female. So my mother and 2 sisters and the cousins were on one side. I was on the other side. Father was in the hospital, and his younger brother was with me. And they ripped him away from me. 2 German goons with submachine guns pointing at me. And we know what happened to them. I didn't know at the time. But what happened to those kids and the old people that this was 1942 in May. They had trucks with vans hooked up to the trucks. The vans, and they had a way to divert the oxygen, not the oxygen, the exhaust from the truck into those vans. And those vans were packed with kids and old people. or people that they felt are not worthwhile saving or can't be used for labor. And then they drove out of town, and the first ravine they came across, they dumped them. They rinsed out that van and came back for more. They also promised if you come down voluntary to the railroad station, you'll get some sugar and a loaf of bread each. So Mother looked at us and she said maybe it was the second day or the third day without food. And he says, we're going to starve here to death for sure, unless we go down to the railroad station. And we did that. And they shoved us into, I don't know, 100+ people into a cattle car without food, without water, just 2 buckets. And you figure out what to do. And we were there, I don't know how long we were moving. 2 days, 3 days, I don't know. Maybe more, maybe less. And a lot of people died in train simply because it was too much strain. No food for several days at home before they came. And no food for how long we were in the condition, just stuffed together one to another. And I saw some people sitting down on other corpses, just for relief. Next, the doors opened, and it was Auschwitz. And there were also prisoners in prison clothing with a striped blue and white or black and white outfits. Somebody asked him, what happens to the young kids and to children and old people? And he says, oh, they're leaving through the chimney. The German doctor started with his fingers, right, left. So he came to me and says, how old are you? I said, 20. So he didn't look at me. He just pushed me together with the other adult men. And they took us to another camp. What was it called? Zigeuner camp or Birkenau, which was adjacent to the main Auschwitz arrival camp. And there we were in a block, no beds, no tables, no chairs, just open with some posts in between to support the roof. And one day they sent us out, standing in front of the barrack, and a fellow from the organization, he held a whip, like a horse whip, with a handle that was, I'll tell you why I know the handle, was braided with strips of leather, like, you know, all around. And he asked me, "How old are you?" I said, 20. He hit me over the head. I still have, this is some 78 years later, or 80 years later, mark. He hit me over the head with that handle of the whip, and it just removed a chunk of skin. And the next time I knew that somebody poured some water on me. I don't know what made me lift my head, and he was walking away, but he looked at me anyway, and I kind of either I smiled or I had some funny look at my face. He came back and he added a few more whips with that thing. And he screamed, "That will teach you not to lie to a German officer." Those were the ones that we finally were sold to. The SS were selling us for labor. And that's when they tattooed my arm with a number. And a lot of people died normally. Some of them were shot just for fun. Liberation Day, there were about 2,200 people left. I knew that we are liberated because I saw two people with machine guns, and they didn't look like the Germans, and they're not in German uniforms. They were in Russian uniforms. And there was a Russian, we met some Russian soldiers on the way. And at one place we came, there was quite a few Russians. And there was a Jew, an officer in the Russian army. And he said, "We have one of your SS people here, one that was shooting at you, and we're going to execute him this afternoon." And then he comes back and he says, "My commander would like you to shoot him." He says, "It'll be a pleasure." And I showed him my number. I spit in his face, and I put a bullet through his brain. And it felt good.
Thank you, Mickey. We are lucky to have survivors like you who are willing to share these memories. You help us teach younger generations about the Holocaust with the hope of avoiding a similar fate again. I want to thank Mr. White and Mr. Kowalski for putting together a beautiful arrangement of music from our band and chorus. And I want to thank Ms. Brewer for all of her help in putting this together. Additionally, thank you to all the students who took part in this presentation, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. Lastly, I'd like to thank our administration, especially Ms. Castellano and Mr. Solid, for supporting this effort to help all of us remember the Holocaust. They helped my colleagues and myself teach this material with the hope of avoiding anything like it as we progress into the future. I close with these three words: never, ever forget.